Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Wild Wife, and with me today are two folks that are not my wife, are my good friends Eli Copperman and Luke Perkins. Say hi.
Little man, I have had such a busy day.
So did I.
Wow. Okay. So as mentioned, this is Wild Wife, released on the 20th of February 1954. It's the 703rd in the series, and it's directed by Bob McKimson. You find this on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 6 DVD set. There is a HD version lurking around, which is what I'll be using for this short. And no, you will not find it on YouTube. It is a copyrighted short. The video will just get blocked. But in case you haven't seen this one, this wonderful, so to speak, time capsule of a short, all that happens is that a housewife forgets to do one thing for her husband, just one thing. The husband starts complaining, and she then recounts her day as to why she didn't do the one thing her husband wanted. So, yeah, not really anything too deep. A few bits of trivia for this one. So you hear two names. So the husband and wife are named Marsha and John, and that's a reference to the 1951 Stan Freberg song, John and Marsha. And Stan Freberg, in case you guys weren't aware, did a lot of Looney Tunes voices, including like Junior Bear.
And the Marsha and John was later used as a parody for a commercial that was later directed by John Hubley and animated by Art Babbitt.
Now, this short is actually a bit unusual in that it actually features only human characters. I mean, granted, you do see a cat and a dog, but they're just normal cats and dogs, right? So nothing crazy like Goofy. So we also see Lacey's, and that's a parody of the Macy's department stores that were around. And we also see Nifty Drugs, and that's a parody of Thrifty Drugs. And at the time, yes, drugstores did indeed have food counters for a quick bite to eat. So I guess for the busy ladies who just want to have a quick soda or whatever, they will just have a quick stopover, if you will, while they're getting their stuff. And I also want to put this all into context as well, because supermarkets were fairly new. Like, there would be, before that, it would be mainly the general stores that would sell a lot of the groceries. And yeah, in the bigger cities, you would have more markets, if anything. But with the rise of the middle class in the 1950s, we also saw the rise of the supermarket as we know them today. So, and yes, I'm simplifying it, but yeah, that's pretty much what happened. Now, Luke, that line at the very end of the short, "Little man, I've had a busy day."
Little man, I've had a busy day.
What's that referring to? I'll let you explain that one.
Oh, that one is referring to an old 1934 song with the same name that was actually kind of popular. It was popular enough to the fact that in 1940, the Disney film Pinocchio actually had a reference to it. And the scene that happens right after Pinocchio gets his finger burned on the fire, you see Jiminy Cricket preparing to sleep, and he says to himself, "Little man, you've had a busy night."
Little man, you've had a busy night.
And to think that even back then, Disney didn't do pop culture references. Yeah, right.
They did plenty of them. You just need to, I guess, have reference to the pop culture of the time. You know, you would have things like those amateur shows that Mickey Mouse would have in a few of those shorts. You know, that was based on talent shows at the time on the radio, which is now pretty much like X Factor today. So there are plenty of pop culture references. It's just maybe not as overt as they are in Looney Tunes. So there we are.
That's true.
Now, before we go through this short, I wanted to put this short into context because it's kind of weird having three guys talk about this one, right?
Okay. I have watched so much 1950s media, like during the COVID break, and I am actually very used to it, and I'm admittedly kind of tired.
Yeah.
So I wanted to put this into context. All right, so this is 1950s, okay? At the time, the woman was expected to keep house, raise the kids, and so on, while the man would go out and work and bring home the bread, so to speak. So it's very much a product of its time, and if you watch a lot of, as you say, Luke, 1950s sitcoms and a lot of 1950s movies, yeah, the woman would very much be a housewife, and if they weren't, they were either very strange or insanely attractive model or something, you know? It would be like the exception to the rule, you know? And, you know, there's other 1950s things in there, and one notable one is how the couple are in two separate beds. And back then, it was actually a requirement from the censorship board that, yes, the couples have to be in separate beds. Why? I'm sure you can guess why. You couldn't even say the word pregnant. That's how strict they were, okay? But in watching this short, though, I gotta say, for the most part, and I do have to stress for the most part, and considering the time period this was made, this one I would say is quite pro-woman, because it does answer the question where you see a lot of the sitcoms around this time where it's like, oh, you just hang around the house all day watching TV soaps and eating chocolate and not getting anything done. When in fact that, no, all those errands to run, they work just as hard as you men having to go out and actually earn the paycheck, you know?
Oh yeah, it's kind of interesting because a lot of cartoons are around that time. Some did feature female characters, but more often than not, they would be in, I guess, the more traditional mindset roles back then, especially with the housewife role or the stereotypical mother-in-law or something like that. Obviously, there were other female cartoon characters that were very successful at the time, like Betty Boo. But for the most part, you don't see a lot of female characters in cartoons that are like the primary focus, if that makes sense. It's good that a short like this doesn't exist, since it does more or less satirize domestic life and the trials and tribulations but behind being a housewife. And it probably wasn't something that was typically explored back then. And if it was, maybe it was a drama more often than not. And other times it was a comedy. But at the same time, it's good to explore this in animation.
But I reckon we go through the short from start to finish, because as soon as we open up with the short, what do we hear? And by the way, this is one of Carl Starling's
And we're so humble that no place like Rome. I mean, home.
Yeah, it's a very punny type score we're going to hear.
Dope.
Very punny and very funny. So there you are. But even if you don't like this short, and I can understand why people may find this uncomfortable and may not like it but you can't deny the backgrounds. My goodness, they're beautiful in this short. They really are.
No, it worked.
Vintage styles, not vintage values. And if there's something to take away from that, you can definitely love a lot of the mid-century art style in it.
Well, there's definitely something merit in this one for sure.
I think it was the Hick critic of all people who theorized that the short was kind of sort of made as basically Robert McKimson's way of apologizing to something he said to his wife or something like that. Either that or maybe Ted Pierce thought of it or whatever. But given the subject matter, it is good that they went with showcasing the struggles of home life rather than make it seem, oh, it's all sunshine peaches. No, it's pretty down to earth. It's pretty frustrating.
Well, you can question some of the execution of this and all that, right? But I do love the idea of this, where the man automatically assumes that the housewife has tons of time, which, as I mentioned before, is not especially true in a lot of cases because of all the errands that they have to run. And it does make you wonder how these days, how you have two people working full-time jobs, usually a couple, right? And how they can get anything done at home, the other stuff, the washing. And by the time everything's done, they've lost their weekend and they're back at work on Monday. It's ridiculous. But anyway, so of course you have the husband, voiced by Mel Blanc. He's like flabbergasted about why she didn't cut the grass.
Did you mow the lawn?
Gosh, I didn't, John. I simply didn't have time.
Didn't have time?
But, John, I had so much to do, I just...
Oh, you women. With all the time in the world on your hands, you never find time to get anything done.
I mean, I thought that was actually a quote-unquote man's job back then.
Yeah, wait a minute. What are you talking about? You're the one who should have been mowing the lawn.
But as she explains her day, I like the fact that she's saying one thing, so you got the narration. And this is like a Tex Avery type thing. Tex Avery would do this a lot, where he would have a character say one thing, and of course a completely different thing happens. And sure enough, we get that here.
Won't you tell me just exactly what you did do with your time today?
Very well, dear. Gladly. After a night of blissful slumber, enhanced by the symphony of the human buzzsaw in the next bed, I leisurely arose when the alarm went off at 6 a.m.
So, can we just say that she's a real super mum here? I mean, she gets up extra early. I'd imagine because of the snoring. My wife is probably going to watch this review going, yeah, that was you for the longest time. Yeah. I had sleep apnea, so that was part of it. It's just, it was awful. I can imagine that it was not fun to sleep next to, so I definitely am sympathetic. But
that was pretty common to see in movies. I don't even think it was until the Flintstones when we saw a couple sleeping in the same bed, and at least in animation, and that was the 60s.
And I like the fact that she's such a super mum that compared to the husband who wakes up all half asleep and whatever, she's already bang, up and at him, bang, and she gets everything done. And is this probably the only time we hear the music cue in the stirrups in a scene that is not Western related or horse related? Because I think this is probably the first time I've ever heard it.
Actually, we heard this cue in a short Drafty Daffy where Daffy is running away from the man in the drafter.
Because usually you associate that with like a Western, I guess, chase scene or whatever. But in this case, yeah, works really well. She's closing all the windows, trapping her cat, and then she goes down to the kitchen and prepares the breakfast. And can I just say, this is a slight tangent, but I always find it weird whenever you see breakfast in the morning that the wife usually cooks up so much food you can feed like an army, but then no one really eats anything. They just have a cup of coffee because they're running late and they go and they waste all that food.
Oh yeah, and the kids.
Oh my god, it's a very common trope in a lot of sitcoms, and someone made a funny video about this on Instagram where it's basically every single Disney Channel movie opening where you have this beautiful breakfast, something that can like fill you up for like 10 minutes. And then nobody eats it, and they just take a drink, and they're like, oh, no, I can't eat all of that. I have to go. Bye.
I mean, granted, the kids in this cartoon are at least happy to be eating breakfast.
With all this commentary around this cartoon that's going on with it being a bit like pro-woman and like sort of subverting itself and trying not to be a bit like misogynistic, I feel like the scene with the boy and the girl was a very good example of how sexism or misogyny and even racism is basically taught on and not just coming out of a vacuum.
I just love the timing of this kitchen scene, how she's making all that breakfast that hardly any of them eat. And I guess this is probably the same husband that probably complains about too much money being spent. It's like, well, we would have more money if we weren't spending on all this food that doesn't get eaten in the morning. But anyway, Eli, you were mentioning this bit before we recorded that the husband, he's in a rush. He's having his coffee. He's clearly doesn't have good sleep. So he's
the milk
sleep apnea.
Well,
the postman in this case. Yeah.
This is just me overanalyzing too many cartoons, but not long before this cartoon came out, there was a Goofy cartoon. He's looking after the house for the day and looking after his son and all that while his wife's out working or whatever. And at one point, the milkman comes by, and if anyone knows about what the milkman did back then, it was, let's just say that the wives played a little bit. So in that one, the milkman unknowingly kisses Goofy, not realizing that it's not his wife.
Friendly cuss.
Whereas in this cartoon, as the husband leaves, he gives everyone, his whole family, a quick kiss goodbye. And he also kisses the mailman, and the mailman hates it. He even says, oh, I hate that, in the best way Melvin can do.
Oh, I hate that.
Okay, so now the woman needs to do the housework, according to this story, and using the wonderful gift, aka a vacuum cleaner with many different attachments. And what do we hear in the background? Ain't we got fun?
Ain't we got fun?
Boy, oh boy, ain't we got fun. You can
just see the happiness in her face with this wonderful anniversary gift designed to make her housework so much easier. Wow. Okay, sure. And of course, the vacuum cleaner ends up being useless anyway, so she cleans the old-fashioned way.
I think what makes it work is Bea Benaderet played the wife, right?
Correct.
Yep.
Bea Benaderet narrates the whole cartoon, and she does a wonderful job with the vocal delivery on this.
Oh, yeah.
She is able to pack in so much blunt sarcasm in contrast to the animation, and it's really brilliant, and it cracks me up.
Then, of course, there was a little housework to be done. But thanks to that lovely present you so thoughtfully gave me for our last anniversary, it was practically no work at all. There were attachments to do all the work. Then, lover boy, I took off for the bank.
I mean, speaking of bluntness, I love how she just calls him lover boy. Like, her delivery in her narration is just so, she's just had enough. She's like, you know what? If I was able to divorce you, I would have done so years ago. That kind of voice.
Oh yeah,
you know?
she's totally done.
She sounds like she's about to punch her husband.
It's ridiculous, but that's what makes the short work, more or less. I would say without Bea Benadet's line delivery, this short wouldn't be anywhere near as decent as what it actually is, all things considered, of course. But I guess the housework is done, because now she's at the 8th National Bank, and this is something, sure, a lot of this short is definitely a product of its time, but what's not a product of its time? Lining up at some sort of institution, be it a post office, bank, whatever, and having someone in front of you just taking forever, you know?
Oh, I love that gag. Mainly because, it happens 2 times. The first time, you have this other old lady who's like, I'll count $200 with cents each.
Oh,
and you hear this little Mozart piece, I think, counting the pieces. And then the second time it happens, you hear a very sarcastic arrangement of It Had to Be You, where usually in other cartoons, that song would play during very sexual scenes with women. But with this one, it's very oh, of course it had to be you.
Yes,
It's
yes.
brilliant.
Oh, it
Carl
is.
Stalling made one of the best scores here.
If you look at the background as well, just the frustration where it's like, oh, they're up a second teller, great, and somehow this woman's so quick to get in front of her, but she ends up being slow in what she actually wants, and then of course the line next to her ends up going so quickly. It kind of reminds me of that scene in the movie Office Space where one guy is in traffic, he changes lanes that's going quick, but that lane ends up stopping, and the lane he was originally in keeps going.
Oh yeah,
It's a similar sort of thing. Yeah, this scene, whether you like this short or not, is definitely relatable.
I feel like there's a bit of relatability when she goes to the blood bank and you see that really, really queasy man who shockingly looks like that meek man from There Ought to Be a Law, another Robert Gibson cartoon.
Oh, this time she needs a withdrawal of blood.
Yeah, because it's a blood bang. Get it? It's a bank. Yeah, I didn't care too much for it, but I just shrug and go, whatever. It's fine for what it is. It's silly, but all right. After that, we go to the department store where, despite being on the woman's side, this is one of the 2 things I noticed where, okay, this sure may be pro-woman, but it's got 2 things that are you just make your eyes roll. It's like, oh, just got to get a few things for myself. And of course, those darn women spending all the money, buying all the stuff. Few extra things. Yeah, that's another great one, right, guys? But anyway, she buys a few things for herself. But to be fair, she works hard, so, I think she's earned those few extra things as far as I'm concerned. So let's cut her some slack here. But you just know that gag comes from men going, oh, those darn women spending all the money, I have to work more. But blah, 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 all right? Anyway, all right. She goes to Nifty Drugs with, again, some beautiful backgrounds. This short, you can pause pretty much anywhere and get something beautiful in the back. And she orders a giant chocolate mold. I mean, that's pretty big. I think my own diabetes just flared up when watching that scene, because that thing would have been really sweet.
I just know you're going to have to use the restroom quite a few times.
Yep, and she drinks through all those boxes because, she was silly enough not to put it in her car before going. But anyway, I guess, that silly woman, right, guys? But anyway. And then a quickie gag at the grocery store where, of course, we hear at your service, madame, because why not, right? And yeah, the frustration of the groceries all being put in and the car's not quite big enough and it just falls out. Nothing special here, but hey, it just adds to her fun day, or in her case, a very busy day, right? So we then see a bad woman driver gag, and it's bad enough that she hits the 2 cars, she hits once, then twice, but then they have to add an extra few hits just for good measure, right? Yeah. All right, sure. Yeah, bad women drivers.
Right.
Ha, ha, ha. But anyway.
But that's not all, John.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Bye, Mommy.
She made it.
Moving on from that. Yeah.
It's so funny. It makes me want to merge without looking.
So she's at the parlor, and again, Carl Starling score. We hear "Ain't She Sweet?" Because why not? I gotta say, this gag is actually, I would argue it's kind of more relatable today because, you know, when how people don't want to listen to women when they're saying that, no, there is a problem. Sure, there's not a problem. In this case, the weirdest thing happens where she legitimately parks in front of a parking meter. She puts the money in to obviously not get a fine. The city randomly changes it to a fire hydrant, which means she's now breaking the law. She tells the police officer, and he's like, sure, whatever. I think that seems probably more relatable for women today.
They'll hear a man's problem, and they're like, oh, don't worry, we will take care of that right away. But once it's a woman, they're like, oh, sure, they did that just to annoy you.
Yeah, it's the societal sexism that's still kind of plaguing nowadays, whether people want to admit it or not.
In any case, I just thought that was just interesting to see the contrast with this scene with stuff that happens to women today. But I will say in this scene, though, my favorite bit is when she comes out with the beauty clay on her face and that scream that the guy does when seeing her. I thought that was a great delivery. But the story ends, and the husband still doesn't quite get it. He still sort of thinks that she could have still done the lawn, I guess. But anyway, but he gets all excited. It's like, hey, I got you a present. It's like, oh, let me have it.
Well, where is it, honey?
And sure enough, it's a rolling pin that says his on it. And we end right there with a beautiful delivery by Bia Benadera to finish off, and that wonderful right expression. Beautiful.
Yeah, I think what's funny about that is that I had no idea that it said his on the rolling pin when I first viewed it until now. And I think it's a funny detail because you know what they say, hey, you make me a sandwich. Why don't you make the sandwich yourself?
Honestly, at that point, you might as well give them a knuckle sandwich.
Yeah, I think a divorce is in order here. But anyway, in terms of the signs of the times, yeah, probably not going to happen. But we'll go through the ratings, all right? So I'll start off by saying, look, this short is very much a product of its time, as I mentioned before. And aside from a couple of gags, it's actually pro-woman. And you actually end up sympathizing with her. And I actually think this one is a really good short, considering when it was made. And it's actually funny. It actually looks really nice. This one gets 8 out of 10. I was actually quite surprised.
I give it an 8 out of 10 as well. And I mean, it's probably not going to win everybody over. Maybe people will see it as ahead of its time. Maybe people will just say, it's a product of its time, no matter what it's saying. But I don't know, got some good laughs out. Benadera is great as ever. Other voices by Mel Blanc are a lot of fun, and the animation and design feels very appropriate for the time period when they were beginning to stylize their cartoons in the more modern sense rather than traditional animation, if that makes sense.
I actually gave it like a 7 out of 10 on Letterboxd, but I'm going in between either a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. I think it's a cartoon that's actually kind of a pleasant surprise, despite some of the sexist gags that will come in here and there. But I actually think it's a really solid short that is very sympathetic to the wife and also has some really funny jokes here and there.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you just have to watch it with the time period in mind. And yeah, you can actually see something that will definitely not be made today, and with good reason, I guess. So yeah, but that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And until next time, take care.
Bye-bye now. And be nice to your wife.
Little man, pray, scat.
Little man, you've had a busy day.
Present.
You did? Well, where is it, honey?
Here, dear. Little man, I've had a busy day.